to our next devotional video. It's been a while since I put one out. We had some medical issues in our family that kind of distracted us, but we're kind of back on track now. Everybody's healthy. So we've been looking at, a new series, and it's called, God's perfect will for everybody. Again, not your devotional career, not your mate, not where he wants you to work or live, but God's purpose and plan for every child of God. And it's found, we looked at last time, the fact that he brought us out to bring us in. It's found in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 23. He brought us out from there in order to bring us in, to give us the land which he swore to our fathers. He brought us out. We looked at our last devotional, Life in Egypt. They were in bondage. They were under the control of Pharaoh. Pharaoh was a type of the devil. This was a place of lostness and bondage and slavery. They had no freedom. They were tormented and they were abused. That describes the life of a man or a woman without Christ, a man in bondage to sin, to the devil, to the kingdom of darkness. But God, by his strong arm, came in and he delivered them, and they were saved when they came out of Egypt through the blood, and they came out of Egypt through the strong right hand of God. Now, they crossed the Red Sea. They're in the wilderness. So we want to look at the second phase. Now we're going to look at life in the wilderness. And it's found, there's a lot of verses about that, but we're going to take a few verses in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 2. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 2, it says, "You shall remember all the way which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years." Now let me tell you this. The wilderness is a time when you're saved, and God is going to teach you a lot of things. He's going to train you. He's going to grow you. There's a lot of things going on in the wilderness. But first thing I want you to notice is this. You're not going to get from being born again into all that God has for you overnight. It is a 40 years. It's not going to happen quick. So many people get saved and they want to be spiritually mature and have all the knowledge and understanding and power kind of in a week. It's not going to happen. It's going to take a long time, and you'll understand as we go through life in the wilderness what God is doing in your life. But he's leading you. So you don't know where you're going. They came out of Egypt. They didn't know where they're going. But God is leading them, and he's leading them in the wilderness 40 years. Now, what is he doing in our life in this journey? It's kind of it's a type and shadow picture. It's a historical picture of Israel, but it's a spiritual picture of what God does in us. Number one, he brought us in there to humble us. Look at chapter 8, verse 2. "You shall remember all the way which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, that he might humble you." Listen, he's going to take you through the wilderness in order to humble you. Listen, you have to go through a period where God is breaking you of the self-reliance. It is the life that depends upon self. It's amazing the struggle that Christians have in their walk. And it's like that one individual said, "I have discovered the enemy, and I am he." Our biggest enemy is ourself. As a matter of fact, you will find that your biggest struggle in walking the Christian life is dealing with yourself. And so God leads us in the wilderness to humble us, to break that old self in us. It's amazing. It is amazing how much self is in our life. We say, "Well, I love Jesus." Hey, you do. But I'm telling you what, you're going to discover in the wilderness, you love self a whole lot too. And a lot of times you'll love self even more than Jesus. And so he brings you into the wilderness to humble you, to break you. Then look at secondly, that he may humble you, look, testing you. Listen, God's going to test you. He's going to find out what's in your heart. Listen, whether you really love Jesus with all your heart or you love yourself a whole lot more than you realize. I'm telling you right now, that's one of the lessons that the Apostle Paul learned and was teaching the New Testament Christians. He was teaching them the life of the cross, to embrace the cross, to learn to deny yourself and take up your cross and follow Jesus. Jesus said, if any man come after me, if you really want to be a follower of me, you've got to deny yourself, take up your cross, that position of death to yourself, and follow me. You can't follow Jesus. You can't follow Jesus and love and live for self. So he takes you in the wilderness to humble you. He takes you in the wilderness to break you. He takes you in the wilderness to test you, to see what is in your heart. And God is going to put you in a multiple situations where he's going to test your heart to see if you would obey him. Look what it says. That he may humble you, testing you, to know what is in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. Whether you're willing to obey God even when it's hard. If you're going to obey God and keep his commandments and walk with God and obey him, even when it costs you, listen, control of your life, that love of self, if you will deny yourself and obey God. I'm telling you, the biggest struggle in the Christian life is love of self. Everybody says, well, the devil's our biggest enemy. He's an enemy. The world's our enemy. Hey, the world is our enemy. But your biggest enemy is you. And that's why he said, I'm taking you in the wilderness. That's why it takes, listen, 40 years. He says, why does it take so long to grow and mature? Couldn't they just go from Egypt into, listen, no. It's taking you a long time to grow up in the Lord. You don't get that. I wish there was a pill we all could take, and overnight we'd be spiritually mature. It doesn't work that way. My kids, at 13 want to act like they're 25. They're not. They're 13. They think they're 25. They act like they're 25, but they're 13, and they have so little understanding about life. Listen, God is leading you in the wilderness to test your heart, to see if you would obey him or not. And then I want you to see this. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 15, he said, he led us through the great and terrible wilderness, with the fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty ground where there was no water. He brought water for you out of the rock of flint. Listen, when you get into the wilderness, the life of the wilderness, and you understand that God's humbling you and breaking you and testing you, you're going to find out that the wilderness experience is both great and terrible. It is great in the fact that when you're hungry and just hungry for food, he brings manna in the morning supernaturally. Wow. And when you're thirsty, he has Moses hit the rock with the rod, and water comes out of the flint rock. I'm telling you, you're going to see God move supernaturally. Their ankles did not swell for 40 years, and they wore the same clothes for 40 years. God was moving supernaturally. But hey, in the wilderness, it's also terrifying. It is terrible. Because in that period where God is growing you up, where God is teaching you, where God is working in your life, listen, you're going to learn some awful lessons that when you don't obey God, when you love self more than him, when you hold on to your life rather than giving it up for God, you're going to find out that, listen, God is going to show you himself, and sometimes it is absolutely terrorizing to understand what happens when we sin and disobey God. Remember in the wilderness when the Korah and a group of people got cocky and said that Moses, who made Moses the leader? And they came up against Moses in rebellion. And God told Moses to get his people on one side and then Korah and his people on the side. And then God opened up the ground and sucked up Korah and all those people and sucked them down into the ground. Ooh, that was a terrifying day. When the people of Israel balked against God and rebelled against God, and they said, we don't want to go into the land of promise. We don't want to fight the giants over there. We're afraid. We're like grasshoppers inside. We're not going to go. And they went back in the wilderness, and the Bible says that fiery serpents came into the tent and bit them. You're going to find out that in the wilderness it is terrifying because God is going to show you that he is holy. Remember when the people of God wanted to talk to God? They said, Moses, we want to talk to God. You're the only one who gets to talk to him. We want to talk to him. So he went up to God and said, the people want to see you. They want to talk to you. He said, okay. Tell them to consecrate themselves 3 days. Then I want you to put a barrier at the foot of the mountain. And in 3 days, I'll come down and talk to them. So all the people were all excited on that day. God came down, and with a thundering roar, he said, thou shalt have no other gods before you. Thou shalt not covet. Thou shalt not bear false witness against that. And all of a sudden, the people out of fear said, we don't want to talk to God no more. You go up for us. Man, they understood that God was holy, that God has standards, and that you're going to have to walk in obedience to God if you want to go from Egypt into the land of Canaan. They have to learn obedience. And God will put you in places where you have nothing to test your heart to see if you would live by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. It is both great and terrible. And then I want to finish with this. I want you to look at Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 5 and 6. Thus you are to know in your heart that the Lord your God was disciplining you, just as a man disciplines his son. Listen, God is training you. That's what God's doing. He is training you and disciplining you and teaching you like a father does his son. And so the wilderness experience is God's university. It's where God is taking you to school. He's teaching you that he's holy. He's teaching you that he has standards. He's teaching you his word. Listen, his word. He's teaching you what's in your heart. Oh, you say, I just got saved miraculously by the hand of God. Yeah, and it wasn't long that you were building a golden idol. And when Moses was up on the mountain getting the 10 Commandments, and Moses came down and saw you had made a golden calf and said, this is our Savior. Listen, you don't realize how sometimes things are in our heart that God's got to purge out of us, that we have to learn some lessons. We have to be trained in obedience. We have to understand that it is a process like a father training and disciplining his son. Now, notice this. Thus you are to know in your heart that the Lord your God was disciplining you just as a man does his son. Therefore you are to keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways and to fear him. Listen, God wants you to walk in the fear of the Lord. You said, oh, we're not supposed to be afraid of God. We're supposed to love God. Yeah, you love him. But, brother, you better walk in the fear of God. You better walk in the fear. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord, listen, is knowledge. The fear of the Lord will turn a man away from sin. You better learn to walk in the fear of the Lord. And I told you that was the last verse, but really this is the last verse. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 16. In the wilderness he fed you manna which the fathers did not know, that he might humble you, yes, and test you, yes. Look at this, though, to do good for you in the end. Listen, God is taking this wilderness experience. You say, oh, it's so hard. It is hard. It is terrorizing. It is terrorizing. But I see God's greatness and miracles. It is great and both terrible. But listen, the ultimate end is to do good for you in the end, to prepare you, to mature you, to grow you up so that you can cross over the Jordan and you can enter into Canaan, a life of fullness and blessing and triumph and victory. All that God has promised you. Remember what he said. Here's God's perfect plan for you. I brought you out to bring you in. But we've got to go through that 40 years in the wilderness because God's going to humble us and break us and teach us and train us so that he can do good to us in the end. God bless you. Don't lose faith in the wilderness. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Learn to deny yourself. Embrace the cross. Learn to obey God and walk in his ways. Learn to walk in the fear of God. But understand that God, in the end, he wants to bless you and expand you and bring you into fullness. God bless you. May God help you in your journey through the wilderness. I look forward to our next devotional.